The sun was still in the sky, but something was wrong. At midday, shadows disappeared completely, as if the light itself had weakened. People stepped outside, expecting warmth, yet the air felt cold, heavy, unnatural. The sky looked faded, drained of color, like a world seen through smoke. Crops stopped growing, seasons stopped making sense, and no one understood why. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the sun hasn't vanished, but it no longer works. It rises, it shines, but it gives nothing back. That was the reality in the year 536 AD, and for the people living through it, this was not just a strange event. It was the beginning of something far worse than anyone could have imagined, and within a few years, millions would be dead. At first, it didn't feel like a catastrophe, and that was what made it so dangerous. There was no explosion, no warning, no moment when everything suddenly changed, just a haze that refused to lift. In cities like Constantinople, people noticed that daylight had lost its strength. The sun looked pale, almost bluish, and even at its highest point, it failed to warm the earth. Days felt like an endless twilight. Farmers waited for their crops, but nothing grew. Seeds sat in the ground and died. Fruit hung from trees, but never ripened. What began as confusion slowly turned into fear, because this wasn't passing, it stayed. Day after day, week after week, the world remained dim and cold. And then something even more disturbing happened. The temperature continued to fall, and it would not stop for years. This was supposed to be summer. Instead, it felt like winter had taken over the year. Snow began falling in regions where it should have been impossible. In parts of China, entire harvests were destroyed by summer frost. In Europe, fields that should have been green and full of life remained barren and gray. People who depended entirely on the land suddenly had nothing. No crops, no reserves, no way to prepare for what was coming next. Hunger did not arrive all at once. It spread slowly, quietly, until it was everywhere. And by the time people realized what was happening, it was already too late. When the harvest fails, everything else follows. Food becomes scarce. Prices rise beyond reach. And then something shifts in human behavior. Desperation takes over, and once it begins, it never stops. But this was only the beginning, because what came next would kill far more people than the cold ever did. What people were experiencing was not a short crisis, it was a long collapse. The darkness did not lift after a few weeks or months. It lasted for over a year, and in some regions, even longer. Historical accounts describe a sun that shone for only a few hours a day, and even then, its light was weak and ghost-like. There were no explanations, no science, no understanding. To the people living through it, this could only mean one thing: the world itself was breaking. Some believed it was punishment. Others believed it was the end of everything they knew. And as fear spread, the first real catastrophe began to take shape. Famine. Not a bad harvest, not a difficult season. A true, widespread famine that stretched across entire regions. In Ireland, records describe multiple consecutive years without bread. Think about what that means. The most basic food completely gone for years. In other places, grain became so rare that it could no longer be bought at any price. You could hold gold in your hands and still starve because there was simply nothing left to buy. Entire communities began to collapse under the weight of hunger. Families abandoned their homes, searching for food that did not exist. And when people are pushed to that point, when survival becomes uncertain, society itself begins to fracture. And then, just as the world had been weakened to its limit, something else appeared, something far more deadly that would finish what the cold had started. Around 5 years after the skies first darkened, a disease began to spread. It moved along trade routes, carried silently from port to port, from city to city. At first, it seemed like just another illness, but within weeks, entire cities realized something was terribly wrong, and by then it was already too late to stop it. But it did not stop. It spread faster, wiping out entire communities before anyone understood what was happening. And soon, it became clear that this was something different. This was the beginning of the Justinianic Plague, one of the first true pandemics in human history, and it arrived at the worst possible moment, when populations were already weakened by years of starvation and cold. In Constantinople, the center of one of the greatest empires in the world, the situation became unimaginable. Thousands of people were dying every single day, and on the worst days, even that number was exceeded, as the city slowly collapsed around them. Streets fell silent, homes were abandoned, bodies accumulated faster than they could be buried. The systems that kept society functioning simply collapsed. There were not enough workers to harvest food, not enough people to maintain order, not enough strength left in the population to recover. Even the emperor himself became infected. He survived, but his empire did not. What had once been powerful and expanding was now struggling just to endure, and this was not happening in isolation. The same collapse was unfolding across the entire world at the same time, affecting millions of people who had no idea it was happening everywhere else. That is what makes this event truly terrifying. It was not local, it was global. Across continents, civilizations that had no contact with one another began to experience the same pattern at the same time. Crops failed, populations declined, cities were abandoned. In Scandinavia, entire settlements disappeared, and population levels dropped dramatically, with some estimates suggesting that up to half the population was lost. In the Americas, major cities showed signs of internal collapse, likely driven by famine and instability. Imagine entire societies unraveling at the same time, without knowing that the same disaster was happening everywhere else. So what could cause something like this? For centuries, no one had an answer, and when the answer finally came, it made the story even more disturbing. The accounts existed. Descriptions of dark skies, cold summers, and failing harvests were written down by those who lived through it. But later generations dismissed them. It sounded too extreme, too impossible. A sun that gives no light, summers without warmth, entire civilizations collapsing at once. It did not fit the way history was understood, so it was ignored. But the earth itself kept the record. Hidden in the rings of ancient trees, each year preserved as a thin line of growth, scientists eventually found the truth. Around the year 536, tree growth across multiple regions suddenly dropped, indicating a sharp decline in temperature and sunlight. Ice cores taken from glaciers revealed microscopic particles of volcanic ash trapped in layers of ice, preserving the atmosphere of that time. And what they showed was unmistakable. This was not one disaster, but several, striking one after another. Not one eruption, but multiple massive volcanic eruptions had occurred within a short period, releasing enormous amounts of ash and sulfur into the atmosphere. This material spread across the sky, blocking sunlight on a global scale. The result was a volcanic winter, a prolonged dimming of the sun that cooled the planet and disrupted climate systems for decades. And just as conditions began to stabilize, additional eruptions reinforced the effect, extending the darkness and deepening the crisis. What people had experienced as a mysterious and terrifying shift in the sky was in reality a chain reaction of natural events on a scale almost impossible to imagine. But understanding the cause does not make the experience any less disturbing, because for the people living through it, there was no explanation. only fear. Imagine living through this without explanation, watching the sun fade, feeling the temperature drop year after year, seeing crops fail again and again, and then facing a disease that spreads without mercy. There is no control, no understanding, only survival. And for millions, survival was not possible. Estimates suggest that tens of millions of people may have died during this period, and in some regions, entire populations simply disappeared. Entire economies collapsed. Trade networks disappeared. Regions were depopulated and never fully recovered. The world that existed before 536 did not return. In many ways, this period reshaped history, contributing to what we now call the Dark Ages, a time defined by decline, fragmentation, and loss. And yet, despite everything, this event remains largely unknown. It is rarely taught. It is rarely discussed. Most people have never heard of it, which raises a deeper and more unsettling question. If something this catastrophic can be forgotten, what else has history erased? Because in 536, the world did not end in a single moment. There was no single disaster, no single day when everything collapsed. Instead, it faded, slowly, quietly. The sun remained in the sky, but it no longer gave what it once had, and by the time the light returned, the world had already changed. The next time you step outside and feel the warmth of the sun, remember this. There was a time when people stood under that same sky, looked up at that same sun, and felt nothing at all.